Gentlewoman from New York, is they recognized.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Squilacci, I just want to speak to a little bit of the conduct that was directed towards you earlier. I think that, you know, we in this committee, I rarely see anyone ask someone if they have a PhD or not. And if they don't have a PhD, then their experience is illegitimate, and so on and so forth. And I think it was inappropriate for a member to attack your extensive experience just because you don't have an experience as a corporate executive or trying to squeeze families for profit that you shouldn't be listened to. I think that is inappropriate. We wouldn't do that in any other form of experience. All forms of experience are legitimate, and yours is very necessary here in this hearing, particularly because it does provide that balance, and it speaks more to the state of our body that there seem to be people that think anything outside of corporate experience is illegitimate. So thank you for being here today. You deserve better than that. But I'll dive into it. You know, one of the pieces of legislation, as has been extensively discussed, that's on the table today is the Tap American Energy Act. And it gives away more and more lands to fossil fuel development. It locks up and locks them up from potential productive use, other productive uses like renewable energy development and climate mitigation, and makes it even easier for industry to avoid public input and the consequences of their actions. So let's talk about this whole leasing issue. Mr. Squilacci, on average, how many drilling permits are approved each year on federal land?
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you for your kind comments. I've got a pretty thick skin, and I'm reasonably confident about my own experience and expertise. I was not cowed by the comments of your colleague. I believe that the number is somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
I think it's about 3,000 permits that are issued every year. And as I mentioned in my testimony, we have 9,600 outstanding permits on our public land. So it's not as if the oil and gas industry doesn't have the opportunity to develop more public land, oil and gas. I think the question is, do we really need to exacerbate the existing problem of all these leases and lands that are not being used despite the fact that they're tied up for many, many years.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, from our data, that's absolutely right. Nearly 3,000 drilling permits are approved each year. And how many wells are drilled annually out of that 3,000?
I don't know the number. I'm guessing that you've got the number in front of you. But the point, I think the broader point that needs to be made here is that there is not a lack of opportunity for the oil and gas industry to develop our public lands. What we really need to think about is a transition. I talked a little bit in my written testimony about the fact that the coal companies, a decade ago or so, many of us were arguing that we needed to think about the transition away from coal because it was going to happen. And we couldn't get people to listen to the need to manage the decline, if you will, of coal. And what happened, we saw what happened. The big coal companies all went bankrupt, some several times, and the result was really devastating for a lot of the workers in the coal-dependent communities, while the executives made out like bandits. And I suspect we're going to see something similar in the oil and gas industry. Not today, not in the next 2 or 3 years, but if we start looking over the next decade or two, we are likely to see a significant change in that industry. And I think the most important thing is for the American government to think about that transition. How are we going to manage it to make sure that we don't leave these dependent communities holding the bag, if you will, from the loss of jobs and the loss of an economic opportunity that they have? I think it can happen. We're seeing a fair amount of transition of oil company employees to renewable energy. That's great. I just think that we need to sort of manage it better at sort of the national level, because I think it's coming whether folks like it or not.
I mean, it's such an excellent point, Mr. Squilacci, because our goals here are to actually protect and be proactive for coal workers and fossil fuel workers, because they were left holding the bag in the case of the coal industry. This transition was not prepared for, and there was almost this artificial propping up of the coal industry until the market forces just really saw this not work out. And in fact, there may be giggling here at that, but we saw even the other side resist pension protections for those coal workers. So I don't want to hear, this giggling at that, because we saw that pensions by the Republican Party were opposed for those fossil fuel workers until Democrats stepped in. But, and thankfully we were able to advance a bipartisan protection of that. But it wasn't until we were able to advance that. And I think that planning that transition is going to be essential. Thank you for raising that point.
Thank you, gentlewoman from New York. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this